There exists a darkness that predates evil itself, a hunger that was not born of rebellion but simply is.
Her ambition was not to rule creation, but to unmake it, to devour all light and being, until only an eternal, silent void remained.
A goal that makes Sauron's lust for the One Ring seem like a child's game.
This is the story of Ungoliant, the primal spirit of everlasting hunger, and the dark bargain she struck that would forever change the fate of the world.
Before the world was fully formed, when the music of the Ainur still echoed in the void, there were things that stirred in the outer darkness.
These were not spirits who had chosen a side in the great cosmic conflict between good and evil.
They were not Ainur, loyal to the vision of Eru Ilúvatar. Nor were they Maiar, seduced by the dissonant chords of Melkor.
They were other,
primordial. Ungoliant was one such spirit.
Her origins are a deliberate and terrifying mystery, a blank space in the grand celestial history.
The elves would later whisper that she came from the darkness that lies about Arda, when the world was young and unguarded. It is said she was once a lesser spirit, perhaps even one of those ensnared by Melkor in the earliest days of his rebellion. But she was not his servant.
She had disowned her master, if he ever was one, escaping into the forgotten corners of creation to be a thing of her own,
a being driven by a single, all-consuming impulse: hunger.
Her hunger was not for flesh or for power.
It was for light. Light was her sustenance, her obsession, the thing she craved with an intensity that warped reality around her.
In its absence, she spun webs of tangible darkness, nets of unlight, that did not merely create shadow, but actively devoured all photons, all warmth, all hope. For countless ages she dwelt in the southern continent of Avathar, a narrow and desolate land overshadowed by the towering Pelori Mountains that fenced the blessed realm of Valinor.
There, in a lightless ravine, she starved. The light of the Valar did not reach her, and the stars were veiled.
She shrank, her hunger turning inward, a constant, gnawing pain in the core of her being. And there she would have remained, a forgotten nightmare starving in the dark, had her ancient master not required a weapon of unique and terrible potency.
While Ungoliant wasted away, Melkor, the first and greatest of the Dark Lords, was a prisoner in Valinor. He had been defeated in the war for sake of the elves, and chained for 3 long ages. The world knew a fragile peace under the light of the 2 trees, Lorelin the Golden, and Telperion the Silver, whose divine radiance illuminated the undying lands in a timeless cycle of day and night. But the Valar, in their mercy, eventually released Melkor, believing he had repented. It was their greatest mistake.
He walked among the elves, his words like honeyed poison, sowing seeds of doubt, pride, and mistrust, turning the glorious Noldor against the very guardians of the world.
Yet all the while, he was planning a crime of unimaginable scale, an act of vengeance so profound it would wound the very fabric of Arda. But what could the mightiest of the Valar, now a prisoner of his own lies, offer a creature whose only desire was to consume? The answer would be the greatest crime in the history of the world.
Melkor stole away from the sight of the Valar and journeyed south into the forsaken lands of Avathar.
He found Ungoliant in her chasm, a shriveled, monstrous thing of shadow and malice, her innumerable eyes burning with the cold fire of endless want.
He came before her not as a master, but as a petitioner.
He made her a promise. He told her of the light of Valinor. He described the 2 trees not as beautiful creations, but as a feast, an endless wellspring of the very energy she craved, a source of power so immense it could satiate her eons of starvation in a single, glorious act of consumption. He offered her this prize, but his true price was far higher.
He promised that if she aided him, he would give her whatever her hunger desired, with both hands.
The offer was irresistible. A deep, guttural tremor of anticipation shook the chasm as Ungoliant agreed.
From her own being she wove a cloak of unlight, a shroud of absolute void so dense and terrifying that it was not merely an absence of light, but a presence of nothingness.
It smothered sound, baffled sight, and chilled the spirit. Wrapped in this impenetrable darkness they moved north, an unseen blight upon the perfect lands of the Valar. They crept over the mountains and into the heart of the blessed realm itself.
Their timing was impeccable, for the Valar had proclaimed a great festival of praise to Eru, and all the peoples of Valinor, elves and Maiar alike were gathered in the courts of the king, their minds on celebration, their watchfulness dimmed.
The watch upon the green mound of Ezelahar where the 2 trees grew was thin. The moment had come. They reached the summit. There, in the sacred silence, stood the sources of all light and life in Aman. Melkor, no longer hiding his malice, revealed himself in his true form, a dark lord of terrible majesty, tall and dreadful.
He drew his great black spear and, without hesitation, he struck both trees, wounding them deeply. He pierced them to their very cores. But this was only the prelude. As the luminous sap of the trees bled out, Ungoliant set upon them. She fastened her black beak into the wounds and began to drink. She was a void, a bottomless pit of negation, and she drained the very life and light from the sources of creation. The sap of the trees was consumed, but her thirst was not quenched. She went to their roots, sucking them dry, until every last glimmer of their ancient power was gone. A black poison of death flowed from her into their tissues. They withered, root and branch. They died. The light failed. The songs died. A silence fell over the blessed realm that had never been known. In that moment of profound blackness and terror, Ungoliant's form swelled to a monstrous size. Her power multiplied 1,000-fold. The light she had consumed did not radiate from her. It was devoured utterly, fueling the darkness within. Bloated and terrible, she belched forth black vapors, and the darkness that fell upon Valinor was made heavy and foul with her presence. Even Melkor, the architect of this desolation, felt a flicker of unease as he looked upon the creature he had unleashed. The trees were dead, but the greatest light of Arda still remained, captured in stone. And Ungoliant's hunger, now awakened, had grown into a ravenous new dimension. Their crime was not yet complete. Guided by Melkor, their cloak of unlight swept north through the sudden, terrifying night to the fortress of Formenos. This was the fastness of Feanor, the mightiest of the elven princes, the most gifted and proudest of all the Noldor. It was there he had stored his greatest creations, the Silmarils. 3 great jewels, fashioned by Feanor from a substance of his own invention, containing within them the pure blended light of Lorelin and Telperion, captured before their murder. They were living light, hallowed and holy, the most renowned works ever made by the children of Ilúvatar, and Morgoth desired them with a lust that had festered for ages. They crashed through the gates of Formenos. There, Morgoth confronted Finwë, the High King of the Noldor and father of Feanor, and slew him where he stood, the first blood shed in the blessed realm. He then seized the Silmarils, along with all the other treasures of the Noldor, and fled. The jewels seared his hands, burning him with their pure light, but he did not release them. He clenched them in an iron fist, a pain he would endure for the rest of time. Their escape was a whirlwind of darkness. They fled back east, leaving a trail of death and despair behind them. The Valar, roused from their shock, gave chase. The great huntsman Orm on his mighty steed, and the warrior Tulkas, swiftest of all beings, pursued them, but they could not penetrate the darkness Ungoliant wove. Her unlight was a wall of confusion and despair, a vortex of negation that even the gods of Arda could not see through. They were lost. Morgoth and Ungoliant crossed the cruel, grinding ice of the Helcarax, the frozen strait that connected the Undying Lands to the northern shores of Middle-earth. They had done it. They had escaped. They had destroyed the light, murdered a king, and stolen the greatest treasures in existence. They arrived at last in the lands of Lameth, a desolate region in the north of Beleriand. Morgoth, triumphant, believed he was safe. He believed the prize was his. He had used the great spider, and now he would cast her aside. But he had made a promise, and he had forgotten the nature of the hunger he had so eagerly fed. Ungoliant, a hulking mountain of shadow and eyes, loomed over him. She had fulfilled her part of the bargain. She had shrouded him, aided his crime, and brought him to safety. Now, she demanded her payment. She demanded the gems from the north. Morgoth, ever the deceiver, begrudgingly gave her the lesser jewels he had stolen from Formenos. She devoured them, and they were as nothing to her. Her hunger was not abated. It had only grown sharper. She demanded the Silmarils. Morgoth refused. For the first time, he declared his true name, shouting into the void, "No! Thou hast had thy due. For with my power that I put into thee, thy work was done. I gave thee not thyself for food. I am the master. These things thou shalt not have, for I name them my own." But the power he had put into her was no longer his. By consuming the light of the trees, she had grown far beyond his measure. She was now a thing of terror that could challenge a Vala. She rose up, her form eclipsing him entirely, and she began to weave her webs anew, not webs of darkness to hide, but sticky, strong bonds to ensnare. She trapped him. She began to close in, her fangs dripping with a venom of void and shadow, her intention clear. She would not just take the Silmarils. She would devour him, and all the power he held, and the light of the jewels with him. And for the first time in his eternal existence, Melkor, the lord of all evil, the master of the fates of Arda, knew absolute, paralyzing terror. He was trapped, the master manipulator, outmaneuvered by an appetite he had created. As Ungoliant's monstrous fangs descended, Morgoth did the only thing he could. He screamed. But what kind of scream was this? Was it merely the desperate cry of a cornered beast? Or was it something else entirely? Think about who this is. Melkor, the most powerful of the Ainur. His very being is woven into the music of creation. So what happens when a creature like that, a literal god, feels a terror so absolute, it threatens to unmake his very essence? The cry that ripped from his throat was not made of sound alone. It was a spear of pure despair and concentrated hatred. A shockwave of malevolent will shot out from the core of his being. It pierced the webs of unlight, it tore through the fabric of the sky, and it echoed through the very stone of the mountains. This was a cry so terrible that it physically and spiritually scarred the land itself. And that region would forever after be known as Lammoth, the Great Echo. A permanent wound in the world, left by a single moment of divine terror. And that cry was heard. It traveled deep, far below the earth. In the buried, lightless ruins of his first great fortress, Utumno, something stirred. Beings of shadow and flame. Maiar, whom Melkor had corrupted to his service in the first days of the world. The Balrogs. They had slumbered in the abyss since the Valar had overthrown their master ages before. But this was no mere call to arms. This was the shriek of their god's spirit being torn asunder. A psychic summons of pure agony they could not ignore. With a fury that shattered the bedrock above them, they erupted from the depths of the earth, a torrent of living fire and ancient wrath. They fell upon Ungoliant not as soldiers, but as a force of nature. With their whips of flame, they tore at her colossal webs, burning through the strands of shadow that held their master. The great spider, faced with this sudden, searing onslaught that consumed her darkness, could not contend with them all. She recoiled, shrieking her own challenge of undiluted hunger. But the Balrogs drove her back with a wall of fire. She released her prey and fled, scuttling away into the treacherous mountain range of Ered Gorgoroth, the Mountains of Terror. There she would dwell, a nightmare lurking in the shadows, breeding with other foul things, and filling the passes with a palpable horror that would last for millennia. What became of her in the end, no tale tells for certain. Some say that in her final, ravenous desperation, she devoured herself. Morgoth was free, but he was diminished. The encounter had cost him dearly. Not just in pride, but in raw power. He was scarred, weakened, and his hands were forever blackened and burned by the holy light of the Silmarils he still clutched. He gathered his forces, the Balrogs who had answered his agonized call, and the legions of orcs he had long been secretly breeding in the pits of the earth, and made his way to the ruins of his old northern armory. Angband, the Hells of Iron. There he delved anew, forging a fortress far greater and more terrible than before. And above its gates, as a grim banner for all to see, he raised the 3 colossal peaks of Thangorodrim, volcanoes that would forever belch smoke and poison into the northern sky. He took the 3 Silmarils, the source of his eternal pain and his ultimate desire, and he had them set into a great crown of iron. He was no longer Melkor, he who arises in might. In Beleriand, among the elves who would soon arrive to make war upon him, he would be known only by a new name. A curse, Morgoth, the black foe of the world. His dominion of darkness was established. But what of the elves he had left behind in the now darkened paradise of Valinor? Their grief was about to be forged into a weapon far sharper than any sword, a weapon that would be wielded by the one elf whose pride, passion, and rage could rival even that of Morgoth himself. Feanor. His father was murdered, his life's greatest work stolen. The darkness had fallen upon the blessed realm. But for the Noldor, the long, bloody night was only just beginning. And so it began, not with the clash of armies, but with an oath so terrible it bound Feanor and his 7 sons to a fate of darkness and despair, an unbreakable vow to pursue any, be they elf, man, or god, who kept a Silmaril from them. This oath would be the poison seed from which a forest of sorrows would grow. Their flight from paradise was marked by the first great sin, the kinslaying at Alqualande, where elves spilled the blood of elf for the sake of white ships. This act brought upon them the doom of Mandos, a prophecy of unending grief, betrayal, and a war fought in vain, forever under the shadow of Morgoth. They came to Middle-earth like a storm of fire and steel. For centuries, the sun and moon rose for the first time on a world at war. The plains of Beleriand became the battleground for the greatest conflict of the Elder Days. Ages of siege, of glorious victory, and devastating defeat. Heroes rose and fell, their names becoming legends whispered for millennia. Beren, a mortal man, and Luthien, an elven princess, who dared to steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's very crown. Turin Turambar, the tragic hero, cursed by the dragonfather Glaurung to bring ruin to all he loved. The hidden kingdoms of Gondolin and Doriath,
beautiful and doomed, fell to treachery and fire. Hope seemed all but lost. The oath had turned brother against brother, and Morgoth's victory felt inevitable. But from the ruin, one final prayer was launched into the heavens. Eärendil the mariner, with the last Silmaril bound to his brow, sailed his ship into the sky, past the confines of the world, to beg the Valar for pardon and for aid. And the Valar answered. The war of wrath descended upon Middle-earth. An army from the Blessed Realm, so mighty that the world itself bent beneath their tread, came to break the dominion of the Dark Lord. The final battle was a cataclysm that reshaped the continent. In the end, Morgoth was thrown down, not in a glorious duel, but dragged from the deepest pit of his fortress like a coward. His feet were hewn from under him, his iron crown beaten into a collar, and he was bound in a chain forged by the Vala Aule himself. He was cast out of the world, through the door of night, and into the timeless void, his power to physically harm the world forever broken. But the cost of victory was terrible. The very lands of Beleriand, broken by the fury of the war, sank beneath the waves of the great sea. The two remaining Silmarils, reclaimed at last, were lost forever to the earth and the sea, their holy light too bright for any stained hand to hold. The first age of the world was over. Yet, in the grand design, even the discord of Morgoth served only to create a music more complex and beautiful. His evil was not the final word. A remnant of his malice would endure in his greatest servant, Sauron. New kingdoms of men and elves would rise and fall, and a new story, of rings of power and a long-expected journey, was waiting to be told. The world was changed, scarred, and made new. The light of the Silmarils was gone, but the light of Eärendil's star remained, a promise in the heavens. These are the foundation myths, the deep histories that echo behind all the tales of Middle-earth. The story of creation, of the first light and the first darkness, of pride, fall, sacrifice, and the enduring hope that even in utter darkness, a new dawn will come. These are the chronicles of the Elder Days. To journey with us through every age of this unparalleled legend, to witness every triumph and tragedy from the music of the Ainur to the dominion of men, subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles. The tale is only just beginning.